Why is it important to know the hidden costs of retirement? We see a lot of people overlook certain expenses when they're budgeting, and this can lead to some financial stress later. If we look at some numbers at 3% annual inflation, $100,000 today becomes $180,000 in 25 years. We need to make sure that we're not putting all of our money in a bank account for retirement. From a financial planning standpoint, a rule of thumb is really hello and welcome to another episode of Your Retirement Planning Simplified. I am your host, Joe Curry. And again, I'm riding solo. No Lindsay with me today, but she should be back next week. Today, probably a fairly quick episode. We're going to jump right into it. It's the hidden costs of retirement. So 7 expenses, at least I think I have 7 here, but anyway, that you're not planning for. Okay. So in the past, we've talked about, how to figure out what your retirement spending is going to look like in retirement. We talked about the dress rehearsal, but today we're talking about uncovering some of the hidden costs of retirement that you should be prepared for. So, why is it important to know some of these hidden costs or things that we need to plan for? Is because we see a lot of people kind of overlook certain expenses when they're budgeting, right? And that's going to lead to some financial stress later, which obviously we don't want in retirement. So by being prepared for these hidden costs, you can enjoy more secure retirement. And we talked last episode about how, a lot of retirees, they don't spend as much as they could. And so I think a lot of that is also sometimes being worried about what they don't know. So when we plan some of these hidden costs into your spending and how much you're able to spend, then that can give you, again, the confidence to be able to live your best retirement, right? So the first one we have is healthcare costs. And that might seem kind of obvious. Now, in Canada, there's different levels of what's covered as far as healthcare costs go. There's some coverage through provincial plans on prescription drugs, but not all medications are covered by provincial plans, right? So this is definitely an expense that can crop up. Dental care is something else that may or may not be covered. So in Ontario, we have a dental plan, and it really depends on your household income. Actually, it's Canada, not just Ontario, but it depends on your household income, right? So if your household income is above $90,000, then you're not going to be able to qualify to get any kind of dental care, right? So the other big thing that we know as clients age, if they end up in a hospital, they often want a private room. And again, this is something that's not going to be covered through your provincial plan. So some expenses. So from dental, you've been probably going to the dentist long enough to get an idea that it's not cheap to go to the dentist. So depending on what kind of work you're getting done, whether there's maintenance or things are happening, you could be spending $5,000 to $2,000 or more dollars a year on that, right? Medications could be, well over $1,000 a year if you're not covered, right? So some things to think about here. It might make sense for you to have your own health insurance, right? It doesn't always. Often before age 65, when some of these benefits kick in, if you have retired and you've lost your work benefits, it may make sense even to have some health insurance for that gap up until you reach 65. And if you have any kind of health complications now, and you're at work and you have a health plan, then you can actually get right onto a private health plan with no underwriting if you do it within usually 30 or 60 days, right? So make sure you talk to a financial planner or insurance provider about those options when you're starting to think about retirement to see what's available there, right? And then also you want to make sure you're tracking and keeping all the receipts for all your medical expenses, because you can apply to get some tax credits on those, right? So that's part of your tax preparation. Typically further into retirement, this is the one that, obviously we don't really want to think of, and we hope we don't end up here, but long-term care. There could be some serious expenses here. Regan and I on Fireside Financial, we talked about long-term care planning. So, there's lots of expenses that can come up. So home care services, like cleaning, meal preparation, personal support. And sometimes these expenses might not be for you. So maybe you're thinking, that's a long way. I don't need to think about that right now. But it could also be, aging parents that you need to work to look after and help look after. And there could be expenses with that kind of stuff as well for you. Right. And then if you get into assisted living, nursing home, there's some real costs there, right? So home care, $30 to $60 an hour. if you're in a long-term care facility and you want a private room in Ontario, you're about $3,000 a month, right? So these are some pretty significant expenses. So make sure you have a plan for long-term care insurance. And again, you can listen to that last episode that Regan and I did on Fireside Financial. And we talk all through long-term care insurance planning. You can also, have money set aside for this. You could downsize in the future to help with some of these costs. So there are some options. Use home equity. We've talked about long-term care insurance. Again, listen to that episode and you can get all the details on that. So another expense, and this is one that really is applicable to most of you, and it is something that is often overlooked, right? So home maintenance and repairs. So we're talking roof replacement, HVAC system updates, plumbing issues. And as you get older, you might want lawn care, snow removal, kind of as your mobility starts to decline. And usually what I find is people don't build this into their budget because they think when they're spending before retirement that, when they get a new furnace, well, that's a one-off. And the year before when they replaced a few windows, well, that was also a one-off. And the year before that, when they updated the kitchen cupboards, well, that was also a one-off, right? So these all feel like one-offs. And so we never really build it into our budget. So from a financial planning standpoint, a rule of thumb is really to take the value of your home and provide a cushion of about 1% to 3% of that value for annual maintenance and repairs on the home. Okay. So if you have $1 million home, we're talking, $10,000 to $30,000 a year on home maintenance, right? So it can add up. And again, it doesn't feel like something that we spend a lot of money on because these all feel like one-off type purchases, right? So we want to make sure we're taking that into account. Another expense, which doesn't really feel like an expense because we're not buying anything new or spending anything differently. It's just costing us more money, and it's just inflation, right? And we've done episodes on inflation, but over time, everything goes up in cost, or almost everything goes up in cost, right? So we're talking groceries, your utilities, transportation, like gas, car prices, all that kind of stuff. And you need to plan for a 20, 30, maybe 40-year retirement, right? So we can see a lot of movement in prices over that time frame. If we look at some numbers at 3% annual inflation, $100,000 today becomes $180,000 in 25 years, right? So 25 years down the road, you're spending almost twice as much money if inflation is at 3%. So, and as we've found out recently, inflation is real. So we need to make sure that we're not putting all of our money in a bank account for retirement, but we have a plan for how we're going to keep up with inflation over time. You've heard us talk about our buckets, having a portfolio diversified companies for that long-term investment to keep up with inflation and help you maintain your lifestyle. Well, we keep that defense bucket for the shorter term spending where we're creating income, right? And that's just one way of doing it. Again, obviously there's the retirement income styles we've talked about quite a bit lately. Understanding your retirement income style is going to help you figure out how do you prepare for that inflation expense. And there's travel and leisure, right? So sometimes we don't think about travel so much, or we just put an arbitrary number on it. But travel, especially lately, I know how much I've spent on some of the trips our family's been on recently. It can get pretty expensive. Or maybe you're spending a few months as a snowbird and you have additional costs to carry while you're still carrying the cost of your home, right? So these are things that can add up. We want to make sure we're building that into our spending and our planning. And then for a lot of you, you have, friends and family all over the country. So you're not really necessarily thinking of it as vacation or retirement. It's just, we're going to, visit the kids there west or down east. And again, these things start to add up. So we want to make sure we're building that into our plan. Family support and gifting. So this is something that, again, it often does not get built into the budget. And it's more discretionary spending. And maybe when you retire, you don't have grandkids yet. And then you retire, all of a sudden you have grandkids and you didn't realize how much you were going to spoil them, right? So, I see my parents, how much they spend on my kids, and it's honestly quite ridiculous, but they can't help it. And the kids go over to my parents or my in-laws, and they have like their own closet. They know there's always clothes there waiting for them. And so I know that those things add up. They cost money because I'm also spending money on those things. I know how much it is, right? So these are things that can pop up. Is supporting your family that you might not have really thought about. And also, maybe the housing market's getting so crazy, you're thinking, I might want to help the kids out with a down payment on a house. Or kids get in trouble and there's emergencies that you just feel obligated to bail them out of. So there are things that can come up when you have family. So just keeping that in mind, this is definitely a hidden expense in retirement. And then the last one, which really isn't retirement, it's after retirement, is when you pass away, some just final estate costs, right? So final costs or final expenses. So funeral costs, the professional service costs that to get everything wrapped up. So funeral expenses for, a somewhat moderate funeral service, you could be looking at like $8,000 to $15,000. Okay. It could be a lot more depending on what you do. So just some tips here is we don't necessarily recommend pre-paying everything, although you could do that, but we do recommend pre-planning your funeral. Lay out your wishes ahead of time. Tell your family what you want. And this is going to take the stress off your family to ensure they don't feel obligated to spend more money than you may have wanted them to spend, right? So make sure you have your will up to place, your estate plan in place, these wishes in place, just so everything's taken care of, and make sure you're talking to the kids about that or your family, executors, whoever it is, about that. Okay, so just kind of recap, we did have 7 expenses here, the hidden costs of retirement. There's healthcare, there is long-term care, there is home maintenance, there is inflation, there is travel, there is family support, funeral and estate costs. Okay, so am I missing anything? If you are retired or some retired who's coming up with other unexpected expenses, I'd love to hear what they are so we can include them maybe in a future episode. You can send that to us, info@retirementplanningsimplified.ca. And other than that, if you want help planning for any of this stuff, you can always book a call with us on the retirementplanningsimplified.ca website. You can say work with Joe or find the tab on the website, and we're happy to book a call with you. Anyway, happy planning, everybody. Take care.